Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations with thought leaders from India and abroad. Today, our distinguished guest is former Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava, who dealt with Pakistan and the United Nations for several years and served as our ambassador to Iran. When we worked together on Pakistan and the UN, I felt that he was a hawk as far as Pakistan was concerned. But his positions were fortified with facts and sound judgment. In his recent book, Forgotten Kashmir, The Other Side of the Line of Control, he examines the policy of Pakistan towards POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, and Gilgit-Baltistan. His meticulous and painstaking research has brought out the perfidy of Pakistan in annexing these regions through a process of forced legislation and use of force. Pakistan denied to the people of this region the same fundamental right to determine their future, which they appear to champion for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. It's a story of deception, discrimination, forgery, and falsehoods. For his exposure of Pakistan, Dinkar Srivastava has made it a point to rely on documents and sources, not from India, but from Pakistan, the West, and the UN. Welcome, Dinkar, to Tea with TPS.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your kind words. It's my privilege to be on this show, Tea with Ambassador T.P. Srinivasan. I recall when I joined the UN division, I was a novice, and you were an experienced UN hand, and you guided me through the paces. It was a very difficult year of period. I recall the 48th session. That was a session when Pakistani resolution was introduced. That was the session known to the larger world, because that was the year when High Commissioner for Human Rights post was created. And Ambassador Srinivasan led the negotiations to project the Indian position. So again, thank you, sir. Thanks for having me on your show.
The 92 to 95 was the period when Pakistan made an effort. Since the Cold War was over, they thought that we didn't have the Soviet veto and therefore they could make a point. So the whole struggle was those 3 years was to make sure that in none of the UN bodies they would get a resolution or even a reasonable discussion. And that we succeeded. You guided it from Delhi, and Ambassador Ansari and myself, we managed it in New York. Of course, Geneva, I was not there, but I also watched your exploits in Geneva, trying to get that resolution out of the way. Anyway, these are all memories now. So let us now come to your book. The time when we were battling the Pakistanis in the UN, giving all the legal arguments, legal constitutional arguments we have, and to say that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. And at that time, many people used to ask me as to why you are not talking about POK. Frankly, we did not know much about POK. Because in my own mind, what is happening in POK was their business. Just as what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir is our business. That I thought was a fair way. But so what I want to explore with you is that with this new material, that's why, at least for me, that you have presented with your research and with your understanding of the situation, how has it helped us in improving our narrative on Jammu and Kashmir? We have had some discussions recently about the status of POK, but our position as of now, privately and publicly, is that LOC turned into an international border would be acceptable. So, but with these facts showing that the people of POK and Baltistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, have been suffering on account of the present situation, and whether it improves our narrative or not is the question that I'd like to ask.
Sir, when we were battling with Pakistani resolutions. This was 93, 95. As you mentioned, we had very little information on what was happening on the other side. Since then, a lot of information from Pakistani sources have come about, and I have explored those sources. And some of the most interesting sources are Shahab Nama by Mr. Shahab ICS, who served 3 presidents of Pakistan as head of their secretariat for 11 years. There is an epic book by Yusuf Sarraf on the history of POK. And of course, I have researched the debates in Pakistani National Assembly on Shimla Conference, which are reflected in my book. So this brings out that while Pakistan supports Azadi and it does not accept the Indian argument of autonomy, on Pakistani side of the line of control, the people of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan have neither Azadi nor autonomy. India's democracy provides a better framework for protection of fundamental rights of people of J&K. On the other side, there is no such protection available. In fact, the people of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan are subjected to greater centralization than the people of Pakistan. And this is a basic message of this book, that the people of POK have been treated worse than people of Punjab and NWFP. Then Pakistan has no case to claim Kashmir on the ground, that the majority of the population of this region are Muslims, because Muslims of POK get 15 paisa per unit for water molecule. For the same molecule, the people of Muslims of Punjab and NWFP, the Pakistanis, they get 1 rupee 10 paisa, 7 times higher. So how do we justify it? So this is
They have not integrated POK and Gilgit-Baltistan and given them the same rights as the people of Pakistan. Is that right?
So I would say there's a distinction they have maintained. The Gilgit-Baltistan, which was originally called Northern Areas, the control was taken over by Pakistan in 1949. This is a publicly accepted narrative now, pursuant to Karachi Agreement, which was kept secret. It was kept secret because Pakistan had violated UN Security Council resolutions by changing the territorial status quo of the region without plebiscite. And northern areas, which is now called Gilgit-Baltistan, are called comprise of 85% of the territory. Now, so this was integrated right from the beginning, de facto. They have not done it de jure, but de facto. Now, on the case of Azad Kashmir, which is simply a rump, 15% of the territory, they have maintained the fiction that this is Azad, independent, separate from Pakistan, by exercising increasing control on POK, and the control is not only from outside on foreign policy, defense, and currency. Pakistan today sits inside the constitutional compact of powers of POK under the 13th under the 1974 interim constitution. All the legislative powers were vested under Article 31 in a council headed by Pakistan. This was ruled by proxy. The POK constitution was not about the fundamental rights of people of that territory, nor does it define the powers of the elected assembly and government. It defines the powers of Pakistan over POK. This is a very strange kind of constitution. Now, this rule by
Gilgit-Baltistan is a much bigger area than POK. Is that it? This is something which I discovered.
Gilgit-Baltistan is the 85% of the total territory occupied by Pakistan. The so-called POK or Azad Kashmir.
It's only 15%.
It's simply a rump, just 15%. So 85% they have already integrated de facto, and now there are moves on to make it a kind of de jure situation is the wrong expression because Pakistan's control on both the parts of the territory is illegal.
Right. And the Karachi Agreement itself, according to your book, was false. I mean, the person who is supposed to have signed it has denied it. So, Karachi Agreement is a forged document, and that makes the case even weaker.
So, the Karachi Agreement came in 1949. It came to light only in 1993 in a case in POK High Court, where the High Court described separation of northern areas of Gilgit-Baltistan as a violation of UN Security Council resolutions by Pakistan, which I mentioned earlier. Now, there were three signatories to the Karachi Agreement. Nawab Gormani, who signed as Minister for Kashmir Affairs on behalf of Pakistan, Sardar Sikandar, he was the POK president, and Ghulam Muhammad, the chairman. And the POK president, in his later life, went on saying, मैंने जिंदगी में और भी गलतियां की हैं, ये गलती नहीं की है. He said he never signed the agreement. So if the principal signatory on whose signatures Pakistan's claim to northern areas rests denies ever having signed the agreement, then the agreement was forged. So Pakistan had
not... Did Pakistan respond to that at any stage?
At no stage, sir. At no stage they have responded to it.
Okay, now we come to the invasion. The first chapter of your book. So you have established beyond doubt that it was a Pakistani army operation. There is considerable evidence there. But remember when we had this, the webinar on your book, a Pakistani scholar kept saying that, yes, this is all true. But what happened before the incident, before the so-called tribals came? And he was talking about some Poonch revolt and various other things. He said that the invasion theory is not credible unless you describe the past. What do you say about that?
So the past that some of the Pakistani commentators have talked about, they are referring to Poonch uprising against the Dogra regime, which was also mentioned by Pakistan in the debates in the Security Council. It is strange that the Poonch rebellion, if it was such a major cause for, the massacre by Dogra forces, if it was actually a massacre and for the major cause for the uprising, it is not mentioned in the so-called Declaration of Independence, that is a declaration for formation of provisional government, which was made by Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK. So the whole thing is a narrative built subsequently. Now, the other way to look at it, these were localized disturbances. They started before the, Indian state intervened. So Indian state had nothing to do with it. And actually, these were the communal disturbances sparked by the Hindus and Sikhs who had been thrown out of NWFP and Punjab. So the disturbances had started on the Pakistani side, and these people, when they come here, there was a communal clash, but nothing of the scale which has been made out in subsequent narrative, because this is not at all mentioned in the first declaration of independence made.
Also, you have said that these plans were hatched long ago, long before. In fact, even before the accession, right?
The plans, Yusuf Sarraf, who was a Muslim conference activist, a close companion, a friend of Ghulam Muhammad, the Muslim conference chairman, has written in his book that he was sent to meet Sardar Qayyum, the NWFP chief minister, at least 2 months before the partition, to ask for aid to, start a rebellion against India. And Akbar Khan, who led the tribal invasion as a serving officer of Pakistan Army, has recorded in his book that a decision was taken in a meeting for the tribal invasion, in a meeting chaired by Pakistani Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. This was more than a month before the October events, and therefore they predate, any so-called punch uprising.
Well, there is enough evidence. There is no doubt that this was a Pakistani operation. On that, there are no two opinions. But one mystery is that when we went to the UN, whether we should have gone to the UN is one issue. But when we went to the UN, why didn't we accuse Pakistan of aggression? Why did we go on the basis of a dispute?
So this was a major mistake by those who were advising Prime Minister Nehru at that time. And in fact, if you go through the first statement India made, India has talked about tribal invasion. While we know it was an invasion by Pakistan state, and it is admitted as such by Pakistani writers now, and even at that time, that is as far back as August 48, the Pakistani foreign minister, he admitted in a meeting with Corbell that two brigades of Pakistan Army were operating in POK since May. So this was a major mistake by us, that instead of going under Chapter 7 to ask for vacation of Pakistan, we gave them benefit of doubt that this was a tribal invasion which did not involve the Pakistan state, which we know from subsequent writings and admissions by Pakistan itself was not true.
Okay. This provisional government of Azad Kashmir was declared on 24th October 1947. And the accession took place and they changed the date. Is that right? And what was the reason for that?
So that is a very interesting fact, which I think my book has brought out for the first time. Thanks for asking this question. So the Captain Colonel Akbar Khan, who led the tribal invasion, in his book, in his memoirs, Raiders in Kashmir, has a passage, a full paragraph, saying, which mentions the date 27th October. He says that this was when he was inside Kashmir. He said they were listening in the evening to broadcasts from Lahore when the news came that day morning, and this is if you read in the context in his book, was 27th October, a provisional government of POK had been declared. So why the official narrative changed to 24th October later? So this is to delegitimize Indian military assistance to Maharaja, which took place on 26th, by claiming that even before the accession of the state to India, there was an uprising. As a result of the uprising, Maharaja had lost control, and control is, under international law, one of the prerequisites for recognizing your authority. So this was the preponement of date from 27 to 24th October was to delegitimize the fact of legitimacy.
In other words, to separate POK from whatever was going to happen in the future. That was probably the strategy. That is when he acceded, POK was not there at all, as part of J&K. That may have been the logic.
So the logic which the Pakistan mentioned in the Security Council is that Maharaja was no longer in control of the territory because the people had risen, and therefore he could not be considered a legitimate ruler who has the authority to accede. And to substantiate this narrative, they changed the date.
No, so that means Jammu and Kashmir without POK is what has acceded. So even if the accession is accepted, they were excluding POK from that. That was the intention, originally, perhaps.
They have, sir, never given up claim, as you know, even on the Indian side of the LOC. So at that time, certainly they were very hopeful that they would get this by force or preferably by force. So this was simply a judicial stratagem to legitimize Pakistan's intervention?
Okay, now we go to the UN resolutions. Of course, UN debate, etc. We have enough evidence and plenty of details, Krishnamen's speech and all that. But what is currently in dispute is whether the UN resolution can be implemented. And Pakistan makes it their central argument, saying that plebiscite has to be held. Or they don't say that, they say UN resolutions have to be implemented. Because our position has evolved over a period of time. Earlier, we had accepted the plebiscite, but now we say after so many years, it has become irrelevant and it's a bilateral issue, and therefore UN resolutions do not, are not applicable anymore. That is our position. But there is a contradiction all through in this, as you have very well explained, on the wishes of the people, then the plebiscite, then the conditions of the plebiscite. There are so many issues there. But still, Pakistan keeps insisting that the solution to the Kashmir conflict is the implementation of the UN resolution. Why I am raising you is this. All through our lives in the UN, everybody, without reading the resolution, says, why aren't you implementing the UN resolution? And that sounds very simple for a young diplomat to come to the UN and ask this question. And whatever you might explain, we are put in the same category as Turkey or somebody else who has not implemented UN Security Council resolutions. And that is, what shall we say, a simplistic argument which appeals to people. Because many people are asking why. And then you have to sit down and start the story from the beginning. So, at the same time, on self-determination and on plebiscite, Pakistan itself is not sincere. So, is it possible for us to expose them now and say, okay, we are going to implement the UN resolution. You accept the first two steps. You move out of POK, let India occupy, and then let us have a plebiscite. Is it possible theoretically for us to take that position?
So, we have said, as you know, that the UN resolutions involved Pakistan's withdrawal from the territory illegally occupied by it before the plebiscite could be held.
Yes, so, and that the resolution says that.
The withdrawal was condition precedent for holding plebiscite. Pakistan never fulfilled it. Now, the second aspect, sir. So, all, as you know, as an old UN hand, all UN resolutions on Kashmir, UN Security Council resolutions are Chapter 6 resolutions. They cannot be enforced. Now, the third point, sir, is that after 57, the resolution, UN Security Council resolutions till 57 have mentioned plebiscite. After 57, sir, even earlier, some of them did not mention plebiscite, but after 57, so there was resolution 211 in 1965, 307 in 1971, and this is 1192. This is in 98 after Pokhran, 2 nuclear tests. So none of those resolutions make any reference to previous UN Security Council resolutions. So they are dead. That's over. So we cannot roll back history.
No, but I'm saying for the sake of argument, when they keep saying implement the UN resolutions, we cannot take a position, okay, we'll implement the UN resolution. That will expose them, won't it?
So we can certainly make that argument, but I think the history has moved on. But
that is double-edged. But you say in your book that even up to Benazir Bhutto's time, even Bhutto has also expressed that view that we may not win the plebiscite even if it takes place. They were not very sure about it.
So that is I'm glad you have asked this question. So even in the 50s, even in the 40s, Pakistan was not willing to accept plebiscite. There were 3 occasions when plebiscite was offered. 1948, November 2, when Mountbatten offered plebiscite under UN supervision to Jinnah, and Jinnah turned it down. Jinnah turned it down because Pakistani troops and tribals had looted and killed Hindus and Muslims alike in Kashmir. So he knew a vote will never go in Pakistan's favor. In 1950, Owen Dixon, the UN mediator, came. He proposed a regional plebiscite because he said a single plebiscite would leave pockets of minorities on either side of the political divide and lead to forced migration. To avoid this, he suggested regional plebiscite. He said India was willing to consider it. Pakistan turned it down. And Pakistan's ground was that this was a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. In the same paragraph, Owen Dixon has noted, however, I'm given the impression that Pakistan would accept partition of the valley, provided it got the partition of state, provided it got the valley. So Pakistan was willing to make a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. If it got the valley without a vote, there was no sanctity about it. But the most telling example was 1953. After Abdullah's dismissal, Nehru was even then willing to accept plebiscite. This was part of the Nehru-Bogra joint statement issued in Delhi 15 days after Sheikh Abdullah's departure. Bogra accepted the commitment. 3 months later, on 1st December 1953, he wrote to Nehru going back on it on the same ground which they had cited in 1950. And as I explained, this was simply not true because they were willing to abandon the principle. Why did they shy away from plebiscite on 3 occasions? Because there was this, we have to look into the internal situation, and the internal situation was there was a full-fledged revolt going on in POK against Pakistan. The revolt started in April 1950 when Sardar Ibrahim Khan, the first president of POK, was dismissed by Pakistan government. His tribe, Sudans, rose up in revolt. Pakistan military was deployed. It lasted for almost a decade. In 1955, Muslim Conference submitted a memorandum to Pakistan Constituent Assembly complaining of martial law, use of heavy caliber weapons, including howitzers against civilians, rape of women, mass arrest, and detention. Now, with such disturbed conditions on its side of the then ceasefire line, how could Pakistan, afford a plebiscite? This is the reason why it rejected it for 3 times. Now, fast forward 1994. This is Benazir Bhutto. As Prime Minister of Pakistan, in an interview to New York Times, she admitted that Pakistan cannot afford a referendum in which independence option is there, because she said that in case of such a referendum, Hindus and Sikhs, being minorities, will vote for India. The Muslim vote will get fractured. Some will vote for Pakistan. Some will vote for independence option. What she forgot to mention, obviously, is that a large number of them may vote for India. Now, given the situation, she concluded, she said there would be no change in territorial status quo. Now, this is a very significant admission, because this is an admission that Pakistan would lose the vote, because any referendum in which Pakistan wins the vote would lead to change of the boundaries as they are drawn now. So Pakistani leaders realize that they do not have the support, and therefore they avoided plebiscite while using it simply as a slogan. Now,
but that is where your book becomes relevant, because when you talk about self-determination of the people of Kashmir, they have to, in principle, include the POK. And they have no intention at all at any time to withdraw from POK. That's not quite obvious. So whether they will win or lose, I don't think they can afford to have a plebiscite in any case. So this whole idea of self-determination, which they talk about, is something which is a complete deception. That is what you have established. But let us come to our own position on self-determination. You know quite well that our definition is not fully accepted with the UN. We have this vote in the third committee every year, you know about it. And they always carry that resolution. The best friends of India come and tell you that the best we can do is to abstain on this resolution, because in our country, we believe that self-determination of the peoples is absolute. So we have given this explanation, the classic one that we always say, self-determination applies only to colonial and foreign occupation situations. We have it even in the International Convention on Human Rights, we have entered that reservation. So, but how do we reconcile this? Because you say there is a faint echo of self-determination in the charter, but it's more than a faint reflection. It says that self-determination is applied to all people or some peoples or something like that. So we have also a difficulty there in establishing that self-determination has already been exercised in Jammu and Kashmir.
So let me begin by saying the idea of self-determination is different from plebiscite. It's much wider. Now, our position, as you have rightly noted, is that self-determination, the concept is rooted in the history of decolonization. So this is a right of colonies. Once they become independent, this right cannot be used, cannot be invoked to break up plural, sovereign, independent, plural societies. Now, this position actually is supported even by the international human rights literature, which grew up subsequently. And I will refer to two. One is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was adopted in 1966, went into effect sometime in the 70s. And the most recent, which was World Conference on Human Rights, which was in your time, this is 93. This mentions that right of self-determination is a right of all peoples. Now, this is key. So this does not limit it only to countries which are under colonial domination. But then
that is our caveat.
No, but sir, let me finish. But then the same formulation, the next paragraph says, however, this right cannot be invoked to dismember wholly or in part the countries which have become sovereign independent. So this is a caveat or which circumscribes the exercise of right of self-determination is built into even in the Vienna Declaration adopted by World Conference on Human Rights.
That is the achievement of our diplomats. Over the years, we have brought this into the debate. But in actual fact, I had tough time 3 years in Vienna trying to convince the Austrian government that they should at least abstain on this resolution in the General Assembly. And they finally said, okay, since you are a friend, we will be absent because we cannot vote against self-determination. That was the position they had taken consistently. And this was true of several others. And the convention, international covenant, we are putting a reservation.
So there are two other things which is I should have mentioned. Under the Independence of India Act, which granted independence to India and which is the act on which creation of Pakistan is founded, the accession was right of the ruler. People are nowhere mentioned. So this whole debate about plebiscite on self-determination was a subsequent.
That's why Jinnah said, let people go to hell.
He said, let people go to hell. And incidentally, British who championed this right in the UN debate denied the right of self-determination in debates in Security Council and in UN General Assembly on the Cyprus question. And I will read out to you what the British said. This is on Cyprus question in 1957. And they said that
that's in your book, right?
The application of self-determination without any regard to circumstances would be subversive of established government everywhere and could only lead to chaos. Now, the British are actually, championing what we call our Atut Ang theory, that they claimed that Cyprus, which was 1,000 kilometers away from this English island, was integral part of Britain, and therefore the right of self-determination could not be applied to it. Now, the last point, sir, the POK Constitution has an article which rules out self-determination, or it only gives people one choice, and that is accession to Pakistan. It says nothing contained in this constitution would justify any challenge by individual or group to the idea of this Jammu and Kashmir's accession to Pakistan. So the accession debate is framed only in a single choice.
Yes. Also, there is a question as to whether there is a third option available in the plebiscite. That also is a matter of contention.
The third option, as I explained, was never mentioned in the UN Security Council resolutions. It is not mentioned in the Independence of India Act. So it was simply, and incidentally, Pakistan also doesn't want to accept it. In all official bilateral talks, they always, including the back channel diplomacy, this is from Kasuri's book, the Pakistani Foreign Minister, recent book. They only talk of Kashmir issue to be decided by the two governments, India and Pakistan. So independence option, why was independence option invoked by Pakistan, by Jinnah? Jinnah made a statement sometime before the partition. This is, the closing phase between June 3rd plan and the 15th August. Of the 500 odd princely states, except for 9 which were in Pakistan, most were in India. So Jinnah's championship of independence option was actually an advocacy of balkanization of India, which he was trying to encourage the rulers to break away. But unfortunately for him, this was not accepted in the Independence of India Act, and Jinnah himself did not accept it in case of Kalar, Balochistan, where he marched in Pakistani army, and later Bahawalpur, which met the same fate.
Well, in fact, it was Mountbatten which introduced this whole concept, because otherwise under British law, there was no such thing. The rulers had to decide, nobody else. The people were not involved at all. And now comes the dramatic entry of China into this whole thing. This Sinopac Treaty of 1963. And that changed the situation quite dramatically, didn't it?
So the Chinese entry in the equation was induced by Pakistan. The attempt started in 1959, and Ayub Khan, in his memoirs, Friends Not Masters, as well as his press secretary, Altaf Gauhar, have recorded that the Chinese were initially lukewarm to the idea. The Chinese attitude changed with worsening of relations with India, and the agreement was announced, incidentally, in December 1962. This is during or just after the war. The war. So that underlines, the political context, that the whole thing was calculated to give China a foothold in the Indian subcontinent, and in doing so, Pakistan had violated Security Council resolutions because it ceded 5,000 square kilometers of Kashmir territory. And incidentally, this agreement, bilateral agreement between China and Pakistan, has never been deposited with the UN. As you know, it's a customary practice that all major agreements between the states are deposited with the UN. Pakistan never did so. China at that time, Communist China, was not member, so you can forget them, but Pakistan was. They did not do it for obvious reasons, because they had violated the Security Council resolutions.
No, but that changed the situation because China became a party to the whole issue, because they are occupying this place. China speaks as though they have nothing to do with the Kashmir issue and India and Pakistan must settle it, while they are actually sitting on the Kashmiri territory. And that is often not highlighted, because they keep saying that, Pakistan and India should resolve it. But they are going to be a very major factor in any kind of resolution of the Kashmir. So, and then they have utilized this POK for their own purposes, coming all the way to the corridor, the economic corridor that they have established, and which has become a major issue of contention for us, because this whole Belt and Road initiative is something which impinges on our sovereignty. So, and therefore, this CPEC, or the kind of involvement, that increased involvement that China has in POK. I don't know whether it's also true about Gilgit-Baltistan. I don't know. But their involvement, the presence of these Chinese troops, etc., that also, so in a sense, Pakistan has sabotaged the whole UN plan by bringing China into this whole system and making it difficult for any solution to be possible without Chinese involvement. Isn't that another crime that they have committed?
So Gilgit-Baltistan is the artery of CPEC. This is the region where CPEC enters Pakistan. And that underlines its importance in the Pakistani military's calculus, because the entire Pakistani foreign policy is predicated on Sino-Pak collusion against India. So they have to preserve CPEC, and this whole thing goes beyond POK or Gilgit-Baltistan, the larger issue of balancing India. China has now growing presence in Gilgit-Baltistan. It has signed MOUs for investment in hydropower projects to the tune of $16 billion. The largest one is in Bundi, and they signed a $12 billion agreement 2 years back. It has probably not been implemented so far, but the agreement is there. They are investing $6 billion in POK. So the total Chinese investment in this region, that is $18 billion, is the bulk of Chinese investment in Pakistan, which is around $23 billion. In fact, it dwarfs by far Chinese investment in Gwadar, which is only $900 million. So that tells us something about the importance of this region in Pakistani military's calculus. Now, this has a fallout for the people of Gilgit-Baltistan. Because the region is important for Pakistan for strategic reasons, they have strengthened their control. So this brings me to the second paradox. While Pakistan's provinces have moved towards greater devolution of powers and greater decentralization, this started in 2010 with 18th Amendment of Pakistani Constitution. Gilgit-Baltistan and POK have been subjected to increased centralized control by Pakistan. I had mentioned earlier that Pakistan now exercises direct legislative powers on 32 subjects within POK. And Gilgit-Baltistan, Imran Khan is now talking of, since 2020, of making it the 5th province of Pakistan. So the trend is in the reverse direction so far as these two territories are concerned as compared to the Pakistani provinces. Why so? The explanation lies in CPEC, which was announced in 2013. And with the CPEC's announcement, Pakistan military has strengthened its control, and the result has been less political space and less fundamental freedom for the people of the territory.
And now with the Afghanistan story, China assuming greater influence in Afghanistan, perhaps that would be also part of this whole strategy for China to move into Central Asia, etc. That may be also one reason why the Chinese are quite willing to accept any Taliban in Afghanistan so that their interests are protected via Pakistan, isn't it?
So there's the other dimension to it. That is, if the Talibanization, if the Taliban, Pakistan maintains a distinction between Pakistani Talibans, whom it kills, TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan, and the Afghan Taliban. But the Taliban themselves do not accept any such distinction. Now that raises a danger. We are talking, the media is talking about Talibanization of Afghanistan. The bigger danger is Talibanization of Pakistan. And there have been sporadic clashes on Pakistan-Afghan border. So, and if Talibanization spreads to Pakistan, it will be a great calamity for people of Pakistan. They'll be the first victims, and of course for the international community, and also for China, because China would not like this ideology to spread northwards to Xinjiang region.
Okay, now let us come to the Simla Agreement, the Bangladesh war and afterwards. So there is a story, confirmed or unconfirmed, that there was an agreement that the ceasefire line would be converted into an international border. And Bhutto was willing to sign it, but then he said, "They are going to hang me if I do that, so I'll come back and sign it." I don't know what the exact situation is. But why are they?
Nandini, can you stop that? Sorry.
So what I was saying was that now the Pakistan is totally denounces Simla Agreement. Is that true? They say that such a thing didn't exist or doesn't exist. So how is that legally possible?
So my book gives the Pakistan debate in Pakistan National Assembly on Shimla Agreement. On 14 July 1972, Bhutto, speaking as president of Pakistan, admitted that UN resolutions do not support Pakistan's case. And he cited the fact that the UN resolutions had asked Pakistan to withdraw from all the territories occupied by it, while India was asked to withdraw only, some parts of its forces. India was allowed to retain forces in Kashmir.
The whole administrative control of the whole region, it says.
Indeed. So this distinction was an admission by UN that India had a juridical claim or position in Kashmir while Pakistan had none. And this is what Bhutto claimed in Pakistan National Assembly and admitted that UN resolutions do not support Pakistan's case. Now, this was not one-off statement. He repeated it a fortnight later in Karachi. Now, where does it lead us to? Because the subsequent Pakistani narrative that Shimla Agreement is a bilateral treaty which cannot override UN Charter is false, because by Pakistan president's admission, even if you accept this argument that UN Charter overrides the bilateral treaty, that bilateral treaty itself did not support Pakistan's case on Kashmir.
Right. Recently, government has made certain statements about our claim over POK. Not so explicitly, is it? There have been some talk about POK is also a factor in these negotiations. So does your book strengthen that argument?
So could you repeat the sentence?
No. Of course, the recent statements that, in a way we are moving away from the idea of the LOC becoming an international. Because we have something to say about POK also. So this exposure that they have been dealing with the people of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan in a very rough and undemocratic manner, does that strengthen our case?
So the fact that there's a democratic deficit, the fact that people of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan are treated worse than people of Pakistan, this undermines Pakistan's case. And this is something which people in the valley on the Indian side of the line of control, I think it should be of interest to them. And it is, of course, of interest to people of POK themselves. So far as changing the territorial status quo is concerned, sir, in this day and age, I think the better solution would be regional integration, which is what India has tried. And this was also the lesson in Europe. Pakistan, as you know, has blocked that also. The SARC remains blocked because Pakistan would not allow India, would not give the most favored nation treatment to India. So it has blocked on the regional channel also any solution.
No, so they talk about the situation in Kashmir, we talk about the situation in POK, and there's a certain amount of justice in that. But beyond that, is this going to change the new insights? Going to change the situation on the ground in any way? Do you see any hope in that?
So the change in the situation on the ground is already taking place in POK. And one indication is the recent debate in the POK elections. This was about a month and a half back. And Maryam Nawaz Sharif, who was campaigning for PMLN, said that Imran Khan was trying to snatch the identity of people of POK by making it a province of Pakistan. Imran Khan denied this statement and said that he will give two referendums. The first to decide the territory's accession to Pakistan, and then he will allow a second referendum to decide the question of independence.
Once they decide to join Pakistan, there will be another referendum. That's what it's.
So
There
are two aspects to it. The one which you noted, that what he's saying, that first you join us, and then you opt in and then you opt out. This is patently contradictory. If POK, Azad Kashmir, is not allowed to exercise independence option by POK constitution, how would it be allowed to exercise that opportunity? But beyond that, sir, there's a political this exchange between Maryam Nawaz Sharif and Imran Khan. What it shows is the strength of the independence sentiment in that territory. This is what she was trying to tap by referring to Imran Khan's move to make it the a province of Pakistan. And this is what Imran Khan was trying to defend by saying that even if it becomes Pakistan's province, they would have option to exercise independence option, which, as we discussed, is a legal absurdity. It shows the independence, that option, that sentiment has grown with Pakistan's.
Is there any movement?
So it's very interesting. I mentioned earlier the 1993 case in POK was a violation by Pakistan of UN Security Council resolutions. What was the origin of this case? The origin of this case was a case filed by all the political parties of POK against Pakistan. And this included being part of Pakistan. It's another matter that this was a short-lived move. The High Court's judgment was overturned on purely procedural grounds by POK Supreme.
It's also the religious aspect, isn't it? They are mostly Shias.
So that applies to northern area, and this is a rift created by Pakistan. This has also a link to the point you were mentioning earlier about happenings in Afghanistan. Gilgit-Baltistan, or northern areas, have Shia majority. This is the only territory under Pakistan's control with Shia majority, which is a reason for Pakistan's discomfort. And to whittle it down, under Zia in the Fata region, this took place in 88-89. The disturbances have continued. The idea is to change the demographic composition. So, and once the CPEC projects go ahead, this will also accentuate this movement. But coming back to the original question, there's a very distinct disquiet in Azad Kashmir or POK about any move for closer integration with Pakistan. They can't help it, but they do not want it. They have made it very clear. But in POK, there's a certain section which believes that since under present dispensation, they have the worst of both worlds. They are controlled by Pakistan, and yet they have no vote to elect the Pakistan government. And this is part of the reason where some section may be inclined to join Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan has added to this by engineering them in Pakistan Army and ISI. They say that, Army is 90% Sunni, ISI is 100%, Army is 90% Punjabi, ISI is 100% Punjabi. They would never allow this to people of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. In fact, as I've traced the evolution of the two territories, they have been now subjected under greater centralized control of Pakistan than before.
Okay, now the million-dollar question. Do you have a solution for the Kashmir issue after all these studies?
So the solution lies in two things. One is accepting plurality in a democratic framework, which is what India is about. Kashmir is a microcosm of India's plurality. So you cannot separate it from the constitutional order from the rest of the country. And this plurality also has to be recognized and accepted by the other side. In fact, Pakistan's own survival depends on this, with so much of, not just sectarian divide, but ethnic tensions with Sindhis, with Pashtuns and Muhajirs now, and Baloch. So acceptance of plurality in a democratic framework. And second is, as I mentioned earlier, the regional integration. That is, which is a European example. That is, they have set aside 1,000-year-old quarrel. Pakistan is just 70 years old. And all modern trade negotiations are about market access. So regional integration actually is in Pakistan's favor. They get access to the bigger market. But this economic logic is not understood or is simply, rejected by the Pakistan military.
How about the Agra formula? Do you have a view? Because that was the closest that we reached to a possible.
What exactly it was, it has never been, there has been no official.
That our common friend Vivek Gadju had something to do with it.
So, as we know the subsequent history, the hero of Agra summit, Pervez Musharraf, he himself buried it. The insurgency or whatever unrest which was started. And incidentally, Musharraf was the chief architect of Kargil. So, his whole approach was to use force. And this is something which they have come back to post 2001. And the fear is that post fall of Kabul to Taliban, this danger will be revived again.
No, when I heard about the Agra formula, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with Ambassador Jamshed Markar many years ago in the third committee. We were standing in a corner of the third committee where this exchange was going on. So he was telling me out of the blue, he said, why all this? Keep the border, no problem. Just give us access to the valley. Simple as that. I don't know what I reported to the government, but nobody told me whether this is a good idea or bad. But that was really the idea which was coming up in Agra, some kind of making the borders open. That was the basic concept.
So there's a very interesting report by Human Rights Watch, a New York-based organization. It's not an Indian organization, certainly. The report is titled With Friends Like These, and it is based on extensive interviews within POK. The access was possible because after 2005 earthquake, Pakistan allowed, the humanitarian agencies and so on. And there is an interview with the POK leaders, including Amanullah Khan, the JKLF leader who voiced this slogan of Azadi in Kashmir in the 90s. And he said that, Pakistan just doesn't want normalization of relations. And there are, interviews by others who say that they went to the border to welcome the inauguration of the bus service. They were called by the DC and said to desist from this. When they refused, they were arrested and tortured. So what Pakistan's deep state was doing, this is under Musharraf, was just the reverse of the slogan they have been mouthing, which is the Pakistani policy. They do not want normalization because normalization, I remember another conversation I had, this was with Dr. Farooq Abdullah. He has visited POK sometime in the, I don't remember the year, when he was returning from England after completing his medical studies. And he said there's simply nothing there. He went to Muzaffarabad. So if there's, more movement, people of POK will realize how backward they are as compared to what is here on this side. Pakistan has no interest in cross-border movement.
Anyway, so there is no solution inside, we'll all agree. But I hope your book, and in fact your book has has started a debate, and that of course is a very welcome development, because this book has been noticed as something which exposes Pakistani behavior in different ways, and therefore we have an argument, I think, that we ought to argue also for the sake of the rights of the people in POK and Pakistan. I think that would be a welcome result of your book. Has it been commented upon by Pakistani writers so far?
The Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, the author of the book on Jinnah, and he said it's extremely well researched. These were his words. What he said is available on the IIC website of this webinar, which was held on 14th.
Yes, I heard that.
And he said that he wishes that the people in Pakistan read this book, but he says it's not possible because the book trade is not allowed.
Okay, very good. The importance of a book is that it elicits discussions of this kind, which may or may not lead to something specific. But congratulations on the book. I'm so glad that you must have spent a lot of time looking through all these documents, chapter and verse. It's very, very impressive. So congratulations on that. I hope people will read, not only in India, but also in Pakistan, and will generate some more discussion, which may eventually benefit all of us. So thank you very much, Dinkar, for spending some time with me to discuss all this. And I learned a lot from your book, that I must confess. Thank you.
So thanks for giving me this opportunity. And I remember our association during UN days, and I see you have maintained your interest in UN. I follow your writings in the press, and of course your website, that is Tea with Ambassador Sreenivasan.
Thank you very much.